Thank you for coming. We're going to get started today. So, my name is Eric Field. I'm with the School of Architecture. I'm affiliated with data science as well, and we're here to look at data in the city. And so I brought in today three panelists to talk on different aspects, and they each come from a slightly different perspective on this problem. What I want to get to in this conversation today, it really is a conversation, is first through the presentations and then through discussion with all of you. First of all, what is data and the city? What does that even mean for us, right? And then the second, where do we go with all of this from here? What are some of the things we can do? So I got a quick question for all of you. How many of you have a Fitbit? Right? Probably a whole lot of you. I got an email this morning from Fitbit that said, probably a lot of you got it too, it said Fitbit has just been acquired by Google. What does that mean? What does that mean, right? I mean, think about that. All of us have this tracking device on us. We are all the city at some level. We are all part of this environment. This is a public space, unlike some of the other discussions going on today. This is really about all of us and the world in which we live, right? So what does this mean? Fitbit is always tracking what we're doing. Well, now Google is doing that. Of course, they have been forever anyway, right? But in a different sort of way. So that sort of sets part of the stage for this, but we have three very different perspectives. So on the one hand, we have an urban planner. Effectively, I'm going to sort of reduce your titles a little bit. Bev Wilson from University of Illinois, and soon to be on our own faculty in urban environmental planning here at UVA. We have Mona El-Kafif, who is an architect and urban designer, so coming at it from more that side of things, and also director of our Next Cities initiatives. And then we have Lucas Ames, who is from Smart Seaville, founding director, I believe, of Smart Seaville, which is a local nonprofit, coming at from the standpoint of Charlottesville and community engagement, and he's also a data analyst in other areas of his career. So really bringing in several very different perspectives. Okay, and with that, I just want to jump directly into all of this. We're going to start with Bev. So I'll flip over and we will get in and see.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Eric. So as Eric just said, I'm Bev Wilson. I'm the incoming faculty member in the School of Architecture's Urban Environmental Planning program. And for those of you who may not be aware, I'm going to talk a little bit about urban planning. So urban planning as a profession is a little bit unique in that we are future-oriented and we are normative in the way that we conceptualize and the way that we actively shape cities. And urban planning is also multidimensional. We have practitioners and researchers who engage across a wide variety of domains, from housing, transportation, economic development, historic preservation, social justice, etc. But at the same time, urban planners are social scientists. And part of that identity means that we really appreciate the complexity and the dynamic social relationships that characterize the city. So you might be wondering about this, this graphic here. I realize that Gilbert doesn't have the same sort of cultural currency that it once did, but I think that it's useful here. I think it's a useful point of departure because it really offers a caveat for all of us today and just in the work that we do in general. And so the point that I'm trying to communicate here, that the cartoon is hopefully conveying, is that some degree of humility is appropriate when we are thinking about ways to leverage technology, to leverage data, to address challenges that cities face, or to improve quality of life for city residents. So the takeaway from this is really recognizing and being able to ask the question of when and where can data and technology be useful in terms of its applicability and bringing it to bear, and being open to the possibility that not all problems are going to have a technical solution, or that data and technology might have a more limited utility in some cases. And so the other important point of departure for me is the fact that technological capability is clearly outpacing our frameworks for managing these innovations. So this story is from Wednesday's New York Times, where we have Twitter's CEO announcing that that Twitter is no longer going to accept political advertising, and it's a little small to see here, but saying very directly that our democratic institutions aren't capable of handling the new challenges presented by increasingly sophisticated political ad targeting. And so the point here is that we need strategies for engaging the city that is able, on the one hand, to harness the potential and the fun of technology and data without sacrificing our individual and our shared humanity. And so I checked the School of Data Science website. I was hoping to quickly identify a definition of data science. I was not able to quickly locate one. What I did find was this definition of data science offered by Oracle. And I should say a rather extensive definition. So I've highlighted the portions of this definition that I think are most interesting and useful for this very short presentation that I'm giving here. And so what comes through here to me is this emphasis on extracting value from data to inform decision making and product delivery for businesses. This makes sense given the fact that Oracle is a very large technology company. But so I'm going to leave you with that for a second. I'm going to pivot quickly to talk a little bit about this larger question of how do I personally use data and technology, the tools and techniques of data science in my work as an urban planning researcher and educator. And so for me, the main application to date has been for data integration. So combining and bringing together data from disparate sources for visualization purposes, and then also thinking about ways to incorporate the products of that work into existing decision-making processes. Planning support, for example. So a research project that wrapped up a few years ago involved integrating data from a variety of sources across scales to visualize vulnerability to heat waves in the Chicago metropolitan region. So in the interest of time, I'm going to spare you the details, but basically what this project was about was leveraging and tapping the wide array and the volume of geospatial environmental data to research and better understand climate change. And to answer the overarching question of where does exposure to heat coincide in space and time with susceptibility. This emphasis on data integration and visualization is also reflected in the courses that I teach. So here's a dashboard that came out of an experimental course that I designed and piloted back in 2016. So basically what happened was the students in the course collaborated with an official task force that had been created in Champaign County, Illinois, and tasked with studying, putting forth suggestions for addressing persistent racial disparities in the local criminal justice system. And so this dashboard and the work that went into it, among other things, pulls data from the sheriff, from the local correctional facility, which, by the way, use completely different systems that don't really connect or interact with each other very easily, to provide this real-time overview of policing, of arrest and incarceration, along with some longitudinal context. Here's another example that came out of that experimental course. This is a web application that was developed by students that allows users to take a deeper dive into some of this information and to basically unpack and explore some of those higher level indicators that you saw on the previous slide in the dashboard that are related to policing and arrests more specifically. So I'm currently working on a project that looks at open data provision by cities around the United States to better understand what types of data resources are being opened, the extent to which that the regulatory context for open data matters, how municipal open data are being used, and if those initiatives are having the kinds of impacts that are typically used to justify establishing and maintaining these kinds of initiatives. And so really quickly, we use R scripts to pull data from APIs from these three most common platforms that are used to provide open data, public-facing open data portals. The next phase of this project involves conducting using different types of research methods. So I conducted 26 telephone interviews in a subset of these 132 cities. The blue cities are where the in-depth interviews were conducted. And really, this is the only way to get at some of the more complex questions, some of the nuances of how these data are being used, what sort of impacts they have. And then also, I'm interested in this underlying question of the alignment between what's being provided and what should be provided. So better understanding the demand for these data resources in addition to the impact they are or are not having. And so how's this research on open data at the local government level relevant to this broader discussion of data science? Well, if data science is fundamentally about extracting value from data for business insight, then civic technology can be understood as its public sector, public interest parallel. And so, like data science, civic technology is broad. It encompasses both processes and also and tools and techniques for interacting with data. So it's not just about the skills, it's also about the broader processes within which we're operating and we're acting. And so, but civic technology has a different audience and different purposes than data science, as articulated by the Oracle. And so John McNutt here in the quote that I've pulled out argues that civic technology fills a gap by activating these open data resources to address challenges that might be invisible or neglected by government in a collaborative, problem-solving way. Sometimes the assumption is that by simply opening up data, this is going to lead to some of the desirable outcomes that are often used to justify investing in these initiatives. So greater transparency, greater accountability, ultimately more democratic governance. However, I think we would all agree that information is power, but those resources, that information, those open data resources in this case, must be activated. And urban planners have long-standing and established frameworks for engagement, for collaboration, for consensus building that I believe, that I argue, can be useful to accomplish this. So, urban planners typically don't have the most sophisticated data science skills, but we do know how to get people together and to get them talking and to, again, we understand collaboration. And so about 3.5 years ago, as part of an initiative to try and cultivate a civic technology ecosystem in Champaign, Urbana, one of the main ideas that emerged from this initial kickoff meeting was to create a weekly gathering where people from a wide variety of walks of life could come together, talk about locally relevant issues, get their hands dirty with data, and again, begin to try and better understand those issues and bring some of the power of information and data to bear on those issues. I was patterning this on a similar institution I was familiar with from Chicago. There are a lot of reasons why this didn't last. As you can see, we almost made it an entire year. But this really catalyzed my interest in open data, better understanding the sort of broader ecosystem dynamics and how this could be a vehicle for connecting social science, urban planning to these broader discussions about smart city technologies, data, especially governance, etc. So this figure represents this is one vision of how a variety of actors might contribute to extracting value from open data to support decision-making, democratic governance. So here we start with the smart city technologies that are being developed and deployed by businesses, governments, universities through our standard public-private partnerships. So these smart city technologies, as you are well aware, are generating reams and reams of data. But I think one of the key questions is the extent to which those data are made available. Because if those data are made open, there's at least an opportunity to invite more cooks into the kitchen, so to speak, to have more perspectives and more voices at the table in terms of parsing those data, leveraging those data, and frankly making sense of those data. And so here, I think the graphic's pretty straightforward, but well-crafted visualizations, for example, help to contextualize these open data. They invite further questions, they create opportunities for discussion and learning that can support advocacy and ideally influence decision-making and policy. And so this is the central question for this year's gathering. I'm going to be honest, I feel as if I'm at a bit of a disadvantage given that I only start officially working on grounds in January. But as an outsider, it seems to me that one way forward is actually tucked away in this definition from Oracle that I showed you a little bit earlier. And so I've highlighted here aspects of that definition that I think speak to this question of how we might move forward, or one particular way forward. And so I think part of this is paying more than just lip service to the interdisciplinary nature of data science. And I think that the notion of the School of Data Science as a school without walls is fantastic. It's definitely a step in that direction. I think another aspect of this that I wanted to come back to was broadening the range of skills that are deemed relevant to the discussion. So community engagement as a doorway to, say, citizen science and co-production of knowledge, I think are aspects of this discussion that deserve a little more attention. I think there's something that social scientists, urban planners are perhaps well suited to lead and to make a contribution there. And then finally, connecting the insights that we're deriving from data science type work to more directly, more forcefully, to policy levels and action. So making sure that the work that we're doing, the insights that we're distilling and extracting from that are framed in a way that makes them actionable and that increases the likelihood that they're going to have an impact.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Great.
So, thank you. So, I'm Lucas Ames, the founder of a civic technology nonprofit here in Charlottesville called Smart Civo. And I got really interested in smart cities and all the data that flows from them about 5 years ago. Particularly through the lens of how we can engage residents in thinking about smart cities and being co-collaborators with the creation of smart cities. So like many of you in this room, I'm super interested and excited about smart city technology and the data. I think that it can, if we're all going to be, most of us theoretically, based on studies, are going to be living in cities in the near future. And so if most of us are going to be living in cities, how do we make them more livable, equitable, sustainable, all of these things? And so as I started hearing about smart city, I'm very excited about that. But as I started hearing more and more about smart city technology bubbling up, I became increasingly worried that a lot of this design and blueprinting of smart cities was coming from the top down or through public-private partnerships, really leaving residents absent. And so I really worried and still worry that if we don't try and engage and elevate the voices of residents in all of these conversations about smart city and the data that flows from them, we may create smart cities that aren't so smart. And so I think that's part of the reason why we started Smart Civo and some of the work that we're doing here in town. So I think residents can play a critical role in this, and it's a continuum. And I think, as Bev mentioned, some of this can be simply from an engagement of people who might not necessarily see themselves as experts in data or technology, but have a role, frankly, as a resident, a big role as a resident, whose voice may be naturally left out of these conversations because they don't consider themselves an expert. And so I think civic engagement on this type of issue that goes a little bit beyond our traditional public meetings and two-way engagement is one end of the continuum. But I think the continuum spans all the way into some of the things that Bev was talking about in terms of leveraging citizens as co-creators in our communities. Technology has changed what citizens can do and how they can engage with the community. The increasing open nature of data has allowed advocates and people who want to effectuate change in government to be better armed with knowledge that can help them ask for the changes that they want to see. So this continuum that goes from engaging people and their ideas, even at the non-expert level, all the way to trying to leverage people in the co-creation of a smart city. creation of a smart city does not just have to occur within the municipal government, can occur among the citizens themselves. I also want to talk a little bit, just briefly, about and remind us the context of cities. Charlottesville, I guess, is a city. I think at best we're a small city. Some might say a large town. And so I want to be very open and aware of the resources that our municipal government and the community itself can bring to bear on smart cities that may be very different even from Champaign or Chicago, definitely Chicago, New York, and Boston. Some of the people we see as really the pillars of promoting smart cities and civic technology. I see there's some city employees in the room, so who can correct me later if any of this is off, or to keep me on message. But I think there's a very real thing that small and mid-sized cities are going to have to face in terms of becoming smart cities and leveraging all the data they have. The first and foremost, just because they're small or mid-sized cities doesn't take any of the expectations for what their citizens want them to do with all this data off of their plate. But the reality is that in a city the size of Charlottesville, there's no chief innovation officer, there's no chief data officer, there's no one at the leadership level to carry the flag for some of these issues throughout the government. So what that means is that there's champions that exist in different departments who are trying to raise up and innovate on their own and to push the city forward in absence of that leadership. The problem is that leaves a real gap in terms of thinking intentionally and strategically about how to push these ideas forward. It often does also leave gaps when it comes to some of the things that are peripheral to smart cities or come about with them, things like cybersecurity, privacy, and of course citizen engagement. So all of that said, it's self-serving in a way because I think it brings an opportunity for community-based organizations like Smart Seville and a project we recently created with Mona, Angela, Felipe, and others in this room called the Center for Civic Innovation to become a hub where some of this civic innovation can occur in the region, trying to fill in some of the gaps where maybe the city isn't ready or prepared, have the capacity, or interested in doing at the moment. And so when I'm thinking about community role, it certainly is creating capacity for citizens to step up and play these roles like Bev talked about, whether it's thinking about how to use data to advocate for an issue in their neighborhood, thinking about how to create an app to better access the Rivanna Trail. It doesn't particularly matter to me what the issue is, but I am really, really interested in creating pathways and capacity for people to do that. Back to the theme, I think, of today, which is how does UVA engage in that? I think it's incredibly important that UVA comes to the table with all of its skills and talent to help collaborate. And I think there are many examples of them doing. I think Lucas and John are sitting right next to each other. They're going to be pursuing with Code for Charlottesville. It's run out of the School of Data Science, looking at analyzing fire risk and thinking of innovative models to examine fire risk. Lucas is an example of, of a department in the city where we actually have a data analyst. But I think that there's so much that data people need to do that they're always looking for help to sort of go to the next level or do the next thing. So the degree to which we can bring in capacity from the university, from private sector, and from but from residents to think about that type of data collaborative, I think can be a pretty powerful thing. I mentioned data analyst in the fire department. I was just at a meeting with a department. It's really an agency that handles an immense amount of data, and there's 0 data analysts in that department. So when we think about smart cities and all the data that's coming from them, it's particularly important to keep that in mind. So you all, as perhaps data science interested people, students, et cetera, I think could have a real role of coming into the community and playing a big part in helping fill some of those capacity gaps.
Great. All right, thank you.
that. I have to go to the first slide. Okay, hello, good afternoon everyone. Thank you for the invitation. It's really a great day and a beautiful panel. I'm super thankful that I'm presenting after my two colleagues because I think I'm trying to stitch a little bit between the initiatives that you are interested in and also what the Data Science Institute School can contribute. I find the last question that was on the board, so how can the Data Science School contribute to significant research, is really a beautiful question, and I think the fact that Charlottesville is not a gigantic city and that UVA has an incredible interdisciplinary culture set in place, how different departments, different schools are working together, is a real advantage. I can talk a little bit about our own school, where the 4 disciplines are collaborating on an ongoing basis, and I believe that data analysis, data generation, smart technology, etc. have an incredible impact on our next lives and democracies. And it's extremely important that this is not understood as an isolated discipline that operates in its Eiffel Tower, but it's actually something that nests in a lot of other schools and receives a lot of feedback from there. So I want to talk a little bit about what we are doing in the design school, maybe, or the architecture, and I'm an urban designer, as Eric already mentioned, because we are not scientists. Our agenda is to make things, to make buildings, to design buildings, to build them, to physically shape cities, to build tools, to build ways of how to analyze data, and it's actually really different than being a scientist, because I think we have the luxury of being experimental to some degree. We can try things out, we can look at them, we work a lot with communities, and the projects that I brought today are examples of this. So I tried to create a couple of concepts, how urban data are a part of bigger agendas. These bigger agendas there are a lot of them. I chose 5 because I'm also showing not only work done in the field, but work that we did here at UVA in a collaborative setup, and that gives a good way of criticizing also where we have to go next. The first concept that I extracted was urban data and new territories. So Bev already said we worked on the big open data initiative, which is obviously a really big data set that is now available for designers to analyze urban neighborhoods. So we start usually, when I'm working on an urban project, the first thing I do, I go to open data and I have a really deep dive into the data set that are available, and I'm trying to understand what can I see here that I didn't see beforehand, because now there are much more data available than beforehand. But there was also this agenda of looking at data that we never thought would be available or would make sense when we look at them. So Eric Fischer really set a new paradigm he was a coder actually at Flickr, where he looked at the Flickr data and said, well, can we learn something from these data sets? In his first data set, he just had the dots of the Flickr pictures, and he was criticized for what can I learn here? I just saw this is where pictures have been taken. But then he started to differentiate between, these were local people and these were visitors who took pictures. So you suddenly have a completely different read of these data. He started to blend them with Twitter feeds. He tried to understand where are people starting to tweet and where do they end. So is this a reflection of how we're using public transit before we go to work in the morning? So these are cities that existed beforehand, but we weren't aware of it before we started mapping these pictures. Or Sensible City Lab at MIT, who puts a sensor on a trash bag in order to understand where is all of the trash going. So you can now understand things that we couldn't understand beforehand simply because we have access to data. So that's a project that we brought to UVA. Alexander Dunkel, who's a former PhD student of mine in Dresden, Guoping Huang sitting here, Luke Jude, who's the planning director and also former alum, or is an alum of UVA planning, who's now the planning director in Waynesboro. We started to work with the tools that Alexander developed by creating really a more thorough way of visualizing Flickr data and understanding how does it reflect on the viewshed, for example, how does it reflect on densities, what are the attributes, can we read a form of identity by looking at Flickr data, by combining them with Instagram and Twitter and all of these great data sources that we have available. And we are currently working in Waynesboro, moving this whole thing step forward, where this is not only about, well, that's the mental picture of Flickr communities, which is a highly biased data set, but can this data set in a community engagement process help to strengthen and rethink an identity of the population in Waitsboro itself? So we will build this tool that makes it really achievable and accessible. We had our first workshop in June when Alexander visited, and we are really hoping that this can be a kind of trigger to generate local identity and also to critique maybe how others are reflecting on communities. The next one is urban data between top-down and bottom-up. We already talked about the data that comes from Google and Co. and the data that maybe comes from citizen science in the community. So these are all apps that help to generate crowdsourced data. Crowdsourced data is obviously always a little bit incomplete, but it has a great potential that you have authors that come from multiple perspectives. And for example, Streetwise, community has incredible knowledge. They know exactly what is going wrong in their community. So bringing these data and all of the feedback together in an app is extremely helpful. Or Street Bump, that just put your phone on your car when you're driving around, when it bumps multiple times and multiple users are recording the bump. The city of Boston knows we have to go back and repair the street. So that is something, otherwise there is no way of figuring this out. So they're not going to send somebody out, but we are moving all the time through the city, and we are sensors because we have phones. Building these tools is very powerful. So Andrew Moncham from planning, Zihao Zhang, who's a PhD student, Eric, sitting here, and myself, we worked on a really, I find, very beautiful project called Community Centered Urban Sensing for Charlottesville. The planning department needed to work on a new agenda of how to set up light standards. So what is the light standard in the night? We said, that's great, we can do this, we can build sensors, we can give you a map that shows how the light currently unfolds, but we said it's not a scientific problem only. Standards sound like engineering standards. No, it's actually people have a perception on light. Sometimes light is staged because look at the rotunda in the evening, it's actually secondary light that sheds into the public space from there. People might feel safe or unsafe because there's too much light or not enough light. So we created Community-Centered Urban Sensing, which is a platform that brings 3 data sets together. Our own scientific data that is basically scanning the light. Then a beautiful way of pulling in the GIS open data from Charlottesville as a fly-in. And then lastly, a participation model where people can click on participate, they can take a picture and can comment on specific situations that they find are very concerning. They're intellectually and academically great project, I find. In practice, I can tell you getting community engagement is really hard work. Really hard work. We work with 2 community associations. They are very different in nature and demographics and concerns and being able to participate in it. So that's something we have to consider when we work on these projects. Urban data as game boards. We all like to game, and you probably all know Pokemon. Pokemon takes points of interest. There's a little monster popping up. It's a virtual reality layer. But you know, now kids are actually outside. They are playing outside. Stamp Rally was a game developed originally for refugee populations in Berlin, where they are able to learn through an app about the city where they arrived, in this case Berlin. So it's a kind of tourist guide that unfolds through a game. Or here, Fork in the Road, where personalized debriefs were made possible through the game. So the project that we are working on is a placemaking strategy. It's funded by the eBackpack from the telehealth program. We're working together with Karen Rubin and Cassie Rubberly. And it's a game that in Martinsville, where kids originally were meant to be outside and exercise so that there's prevention of getting sick. And we said, let's combine healthy living with learning about a place and contributing data off a place that are really necessary for the planning department who's currently working into the revitalization of Uptown. So the Via Martinsville game is, on the one hand, a digital guide, because you go to the point of interest, you answer questions, you get points, but you are also contributing to a data set through the points of places by identifying things that you like and you don't like, and you are identifying why, and you are also telling us which generation you are, because it's a very big difference if you're a senior person and you still remember the great time in Martinsville when it was a manufacturing town versus kids that are growing up today and never learned about this past. So it's going to promise, we just submitted it for an NSF, we really look forward of getting the funding. So urban data and responsive representation, that's something that architects worked on for the last 10, 15 years, taking urban data like Twitter tweets, traffic data, etc., and then just visualizing it through it. I call it the gallery piece. It's not really, it's beautiful, it's not necessarily teaching us something, but it's really beautiful. It was the first paradigm of taking urban data and putting them into an artifact that then can speak to us. So these are a couple of examples from colleagues. Yes, so sorry. Do I have a minute?
Yeah.
Okay. The video, I really would love to show the video. Okay, so that's a project that we worked on ourselves, Urban Syncopation. It originally was installed in Toronto and brought in the traffic data, live traffic data of 5 streets, and became a reflection, like a cartography of the city. We brought it to UVA, and since then it has only the live feed of the sound. And I'm stopping this now. At the moment it's... Yes! So, the reason why I bring this into the presentation is it was designed as a live cartography of urban sounds, but when we brought it, it didn't make sense to reflect Toronto. But what it actually does, it talks to you. It says hello. At the moment, it's also reflecting the sound on the lawn. It did something to me by recognizing, well, this artifact can speak to me because it can sense me. And I was super fascinated by this kind of direct response. And that brings us to the last chapter, which is basically urban data and smart environments. It's environments that are, in this case, this is Google Sidewalk Lab in Toronto that took over a waterfront piece. Sidewalk Lab is a sister of Google. We have to be really keen that it's a corporate firm that takes over the city of Toronto, develops it, and designs the city of the future. And while this is really sold as great new environments, great new working places, great new affordable housing, great new public spaces, everything that we want to see with balloons and little kites and a rendering, they really don't talk about all the sensors that are going to be a part of this new neighborhood. They had an advisor, which are on the board, that was Anna Karvukian, who was the commissioner for privacy and developed the concept of privacy by design. And she stepped off the board because City Sidewalk Lab they were agreed to the privacy by design, but they said the data is going to be owned by the company. And this is where she stepped off the board. This resistance was so important because the whole planning department created resistance. They now created a public trust fund where the data is stored in a public trust. But you have to imagine how much resistance it needed so that they are not just doing what they want to do, which is mean I take the data and then I'm selling them later off. And you have to, it's tons of leverage, the best piece in Toronto that you can develop. Imagine something like this at an edge city where nobody, well, I'm just going to the next community, I don't follow your restrictions. So that is so important that we look at what is happening to these data and who's owning them. The last piece, we are Lucas, Luis, Philippe, Andrew, and myself, we are working on this exciting CIF grant, Network Public Space, where we actually bring this topic into public spaces in Charlottesville. This is just a prototype that we worked on before, but this is key here, where smart infrastructure that have to be visible and not ubiquitous, because when they are hidden, I have not even an idea that they are taking data. They become smart advisors, but they become our companions in the public space, where they can tell us things that we don't understand because we don't have these sensors. So we can actually become better citizens. All the data is stored on a web interface. Eric is going to work on this. And they can be, you can read the histories. It's going to be open IPA, donated to open data. So I think while this is a small prototype, what we want to initiate is we have to understand what's going to happen in our cities, and we test this in our own communities. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so now we're going to open this up to conversation, not just questions, but actual conversation here. We've got 3 sort of different but highly connected takes on this, some examples of some things that are already somewhat in progress, even right here in Charlottesville. Open it up. What do you think? Where do we go from here? Where's the School of Data Science? Where's UVA? Where does Charlottesville, or for that matter, any other city, go from here? Let's start with yours. I have a couple of questions I can throw in there, but I want to hear yours first. You got nothing.
Let's start with some questions.
You got nothing?
Right there.
All right, then I guess I will prompt. So, we've all studied to some degree, but I want to really start to get at the challenge and even engage all of you in this challenge of, as Mona, you had said very specifically, getting communities to participate in this is hard, right? Lucas, this has been a large piece of your own agenda. It's largely the sort of guidance of what you're trying to get at here. Bev, you talked about this as well in terms of community participation. We've already had some of these challenges. So how do we go about dealing with that? We know what the challenges are. We can articulate them. You already largely have. How do we get through that? What's next?
Yeah, that's the biggest issue.
Well, that's a big question.
It is a big
It's a
question.
really big question. I maybe want to start from what I'm.
So we're going to have to speak up because there's a lot of ambient noise in our own little microsystem here.
I think we are. I think we all lack. We really all lack data literacy and ethics. Even if we think we are familiar. I'm always blown away when I talk to somebody who deals with, let's say, only urban data. There are so many other data, but let's say urban data. Things that I never thought about, things that I actually don't even know is as good as it bad. I mean, data in general are not good or bad. The way how we handle them are good and bad. And I'm just seeing our democratic systems all over the world, but honestly, failing, and they need to be restabilized. And I hope that the whole data revolution is a way of that we see the signs, that we reposition ourselves, that we have open dialogues, that we allow an experimental conflict. So the prototype that we developed for this project is Ostenda Illuminata. It's an artificial plant that can sense stuff. And one of our students said, but what is when she's going to spy on you? And I said, exactly. I want to learn this from my own installation, that this is possible. Then one day, waking up, because Siemens just installed all the sensors and they are spying on us all the time, and I have no clue about it. So I think that projects like this, while there might be still prototypes and they're not going to change knowledge, but they can sensitize. It can make us more sensitive and more aware and create dialogue. And to some degree, it also initiates a political position that I believe is extremely important. And I'm actually excited about it because I find the data revolution also gives us an opportunity to build better cities in a lot of ways and to build them together because we have to do this together, otherwise we're totally failing.
I would just echo what Mona just said. So I think that part of the issue is building some degree of literacy and technical capacity. We can talk more about what the extent of that literacy and technical capacity is for different situations. But there's also this question of trust, right? How do you build trust with the public, with the particular community? And I think the answer is that it has to be in the form of a sustained engagement and a sustained commitment. It's not something that can be a one-off or something that is done necessarily within the context of a course. I think that in order to have that real sort of meaningful engagement and connection, to build that level of trust and understanding, you really have to have a model that can accommodate that, in addition to the resources. And so we have to change the way that we think about not just community engagement and outreach, but also the way that we think about, change the way that we approach teaching and education, and also the way that we approach research, to be more flexible and to be more holistic.
So Bev, you've already said that not every problem has a technical solution. Lucas, how do we get trust?
Well, I don't. Good question. But let me hop on to that,
Yeah,
because that I think he's hit on something that's precisely right, and something we've learned the hard way is that ad hoc engagements by project is not going to be the solution for gaining widespread interest or engagement in this topic. Ad hoc will get us essentially the same people I see in the room every night. And so, which is part of the reason we've tried to pivot toward a model that could be sustained and run over the long run. I think it's also the issue that happens with UVA a lot, where well-meaning, good-intentioned students, professors roll into the community on their academic calendar, roll out, and then the stakeholders are kind of left maybe with good outcomes, but maybe just a lot of sunk cost. And so I think finding a way to thread that, exactly like you said, is critical. I also think it has to do with, and one of the things we have had success with is trying to take events past the technical and think of them in a more broad-based design way to give pathways for different people to contribute. When we do that, it comes at the expense of technical people who want to come in and just bang out and code and work on something, not being interested. But we've seen instant dividends, particularly with our the gender ratio of our events changing dramatically, where more women in particular have come 60-40 in some of our events when we've taken a more holistic and design approach as opposed to saying, let's just build stuff. And so I think there is a blend there, and I don't have the answer because we haven't figured it out, of what is the model of marrying the technical, increasing the technical education, all that, but also providing pathways for a resident with a good idea has something to contribute to every single one of these projects, but they have to feel validated, and so doing that. And that only occurs over time with sustained effort, which I don't yet. We're working on it.
Right, but it takes that sustained effort, but we have to start somewhere, right? We have to be able to get out there, and it's not just that, okay, we're done in a semester kind of a thing. We really, so, you know, we have people from the city here as well as other community engagement people. What are your thoughts on this, right? How do we start engaging? And I'm looking at you two because you're city, but, and of course, have been around the university as well. How do we get out to this, right? Or urban planners and community engagement planners. How do we get the city, get the community actually engaged in this? Go.
I would say it's kind of like dating. You have to dip your toes in. You need to go to the agency, meet the heads, meet the analysts, interview and talk to people, and maybe do that 2 months before you can start a project. And if there's a way to get, you know, experiential with it, like I can get you on a fire truck. If you want to know about the modern fire service, go ride a fire truck and see what guys are doing. Whenever they show up to McKim Hall for the 7th false alarm that day, those things you can feel. There's a quality of frustration, and you can feel what the actual rank and file people doing work or experiencing. So I would say you have to. There's a warm up period before you launch into the banging on keyboards and the coding.
Definitely.
You got to get the context, and it's multifaceted. It takes a while to get it's worth it.
Yeah, to echo Lucas, a lot of times we, the city, find out after the fact about some of these projects, so really it'd be great to be engaged earlier on so we can help you guys make those connections. Like, we have so many resources in the community already. I know our community pretty well because I do constant communication, so letting us know your problems or issues, and we can then try and utilize our own resources to get those communications out as well. We all have different means, either billions or social media, whatever. We have a band of kids that can go door to door. There are those options. So letting us know, at the time is always helpful.
Are you from Charlottesville? Charlottesville Planning Department?
No. Public Works.
That's right.
Not planning. What department?
I'm in Public Works.
And so, what is the best way for us, or for the School of Data Science, for School of Architecture, any of us, to actually connect in on that? I mean, clearly we already have some of these connections.
Right, and you mentioned, I know we don't have a chief data operator or
Right.
innovation. We have an innovation team, and we do have an open data advisory group. So they all have emails. Yeah, we don't have one person doing it, but we have like 12 of us. So we don't have one employee, but hopefully with the couple hours I get, each week, we can get it done, kind of thing. So we do want engagement, and we want to work with PBA, and half the time we just don't know what you guys are working on.
We're working with Alex. So and
Yes, great.
the CCUS project was motivated through the city. And
Perfect,
we
yeah.
said, well, then let's make it an engagement process actually.
Right.
But still, this model. There's a situation that city staff is overwhelmed with a lot of projects, and the problem is if you start working on it and you don't maintain them, the engagement really drops, which is weird. And just went towards it. So we work with 2 community associations, and that's obviously the first thing that we do. They are representatives somehow of community members. They were both very different. The first one, and I'm not even naming them, the first one extremely well organized, extremely clear on what smart city is, not afraid of data collection at all. And the second one, absolutely the opposite. And that had also something to do with how people are exposed to these technologies. technologies. This is a kind of, it comes back to the trust problem, right? So I think early engagement is super important. Early engagement, like engage schools. Allow everyone to be a citizen, even if they're under 18, because it's their future. It's actually super key in Greater Coburg. So early engagement is really important. So we have the new center here.
No, I was just going to offer up the observation that the city has its same baggage with the community
Yes,
that the
they do.
university has with the
Yes,
community.
that's correct.
And so they pointed you to the community where you had all the problems in the planning department. So I think one thing is for UVA right now, because we're in a real community engaged moment, right? Just between the strategic plan and the new community council, that what we really have to think about is longitudinal relationships with places where we want to build things. And I think particularly it's social relative to the social equity questions. Actually, UIUC used to have this really great long-term relationship with East St. Louis, right? And I think something like that would be very instrumental. And I think we already have right now this downtown space called the Pie Chest that season started. Being in the community more.
Yep.
I mean, so in their planning program, I would love to see our students being in a place like that's a drop-in center. You're like, I want to have the latest census data on my community, and the kids help them knock off something from, the ACS or whatever. And that we have a service function that helps also build trust over time.
I mean, the space that you're referring to is Thriving Cities in CCI, which
Right,
is
and it's with
Lucas,
Seasons
right?
working with you on that, right? Yeah. So there's some great that's a start, right?
And I think honestly it's important to say, going back to the original context about sort of the university and this sort of elitism coming down and sort of imposing, I think you had brought that up very directly, that even the School of Data Science is one of it's a member of that group, right, coming in and saying, we know how to do this kind of stuff, right? So it's not just the university, it's SDS also coming in. We have to be very careful at how we do that engagement,
Yeah, so humility
including the new
is
building.
important as trust.
That's right, humility is a way to engage trust. So I'm almost going to lead that into my second question, which goes more specifically to the science. So the first was sort of on the data. Now what about the science itself, right? There's an entire science to dealing with the data that we're talking about. Call that spatial analytics if you want, call it various other forms of processing, visualizing, and so forth. But where do we again go from here? This is sort of a newer area. GIS has sort of built itself up as the idea predominantly of being able to see the data that we have. Then we begin to start getting into a little bit of analytic upon how it works. But that's largely underdeveloped right now from a real science, right? So I want to sort of open this up on where do we go with the science to be able to push new avenues of actual spatial analytic or city-oriented analytics. So you guys and then out there, go ahead.
Well, I'm super excited about live real-time data sets that are feeding. They are on the one hand side storing data, so I can always go back in history and understand did something transformed. Because GIS data very often are static, even if they have a timestamp on it, but to animate them is a completely different job. So Louis Philippe, right, sent me just yesterday the map of all the LoRa stations that are now able to transmit data. So when you have sensors and they are communicating with each other and they can be connected to a server that has a beautiful interface where data can come in on an ongoing basis, I basically create a cartography that builds up over time. And I find this is the most successful way of understanding patterns. Because if I just look at one timestamp, I don't understand transformations and transitions. And specifically, our interest in environmental data, but on one day you maybe have a great air quality data, but over the term of the years, you actually see that this is changing. So I'm very interested in real-time data.
So visualizing it,
Visualize
and
it and-
being able to see the
Yeah.
patterns in more sophisticated ways.
Yes, and
Okay.
it's a good, beautiful problem to have, as one discipline is usually not able to do everything.
Right.
Because even if you can put all the codes together, you might not do, graphic visuality or interpretation of these data, etc. So you need always multiple people sitting at the table, which is the interdisciplinarity that we are looking for.
So for me, I think that geospatial data are incredibly important, given that cities are complex, they're dynamic, and so if we agree that some of the grand challenges that cities are facing include dealing with climate change impacts or addressing social inequality, those are spatially explicit. And so geospatial data are fundamental to our, I guess, efforts to grapple with and effectively respond to those kinds of challenges. I was actually at a conference last week. I was having some informal conversations with planning researchers about big data, and it eventually came around to this question of what's an appropriate level of technical proficiency. And I think that ultimately we have to think about whether the kinds of data that exist, and again, there's data are ubiquitous now, but are they the right kinds of data? Whether you're talking about spatial and temporal resolution, or the way that they're, I guess, packaged and made available, whether there are fundamental mismatches between those data that exist and those data that are needed in order to support decision making and to help us move forward, I think are really sort of critical, and they transcend the more technical aspects. So I would say it's about not losing sight of the objectives in favor of the tools and the techniques.
Just tangential to that too, and I don't see Sharon Kuhn here, but if she knew I was going to be talking about standards, she'd be thrilled. Thinking about standards, and particularly geospatial, one of the issues we have in cities and people starting to use city data or other data to draw conclusions about the city is that the geospatial data linked to different data sets varies tremendously. So we have people mashing up tract data with precincts data, with neighborhood data, with all of Charlottesville data, and it's a real problem. So I think in terms of, and this is maybe very low on the list in terms of like forward-thinking science, but at the basic level, a standard for a uniform standard for how we're putting out and tagging data within our cities will be incredibly helpful. Otherwise, we're going to get all these analyses about Charlottesville writ large, but they don't take into account the different neighborhood compositions or what's going on here, there, or elsewhere. And it's a real challenge because people say, oh, I got the census tract, and that's usually from 2010 or something, and then they're comparing it to the 2018 open, and it's so some sort of standardization of that, and it's not an easy problem, but a standards issue, it's important.
If I could just also follow up with that.
Please.
For me, that comes back to this question of data governance, right? Mm-hmm. So broadening the spectrum of voices of constituencies that are involved in the decisions around how and what data we're collecting. Because again, if we're going to better align what exists with what should exist, then we have to, at some point, think about the audience for those data and the specific needs of those potential users.
I have one comment. I mean, it moves away a little bit from the science aspect, but it maybe, I think it's an important aspect. So, on some of the workshops that I joined with the Smart Cities initiative, there came up the concern of being actually over-informed and under-equipped to handle the things that we now learn from the data. And that could make us a very dysfunctional society. Yes. So I am very concerned, and just in a little way, coming back to CCUS, for sure, one of the neighborhoods, the association, the first thing that they told us was, yeah, sure, we can contribute to the data, but we are very concerned that the city is not doing anything with this now. They're not going to repair, they're not going to do this, etc., etc. So that's something where it was a very classic situation. And maybe I should actually talk to you when you're with because that is something that is really concerning, because we have all of these technologies and all of that create a lot of knowledge potential. But then we also have to act on the data.
We need the real outcomes.
Yes, and I think we need to work on this simultaneously. It's like not only the one muscle, but the other one too.
Any comments on this from out here? Go ahead.
I just wish we had some public health people in the room
Yeah.
too. Because for me, that's one of the most critical ones about the mismatch. And a huge privacy concern, of course. But for city planners, if we could have much lower or higher resolution data about health, it could be really informative for infrastructure investment for all sorts of things. But right now, the behavioral risk factor surveillance survey or whatever it is, it's done at county level at least. We have very bad health data. And so I don't know if you could ever get people to agree that it's going to be, I mean, neighborhood is kind of a stupid measure because nobody can agree what a neighborhood is, but if you want to know, it's something that we could share data and have it standardized to a place where it actually would become meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about the dichotomy between a project-based approach that we've kind of done this a couple times, and then like nobody really proposes I want to build a sustainable, maintainable, operationalizable kind of a thing. It's make a poster, and I think that feeds the value proposition for citizens of if I want to engage in another one of those when I get engaged in that for 6 months and then that graduate student is done and they're gone.
Funding, run out. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just as a resident, I've been here a couple years now. I just thought it was interesting for traffic, for example. To me, what would be common sense is there was controversy over Rose Hill Drive in Rugby when they took this light and all of a sudden shrouded it, put up stop signs. There were long queues, and why can't, just more of a common sense thing, why can't we use Google data, going into that town hall meeting where, it's 2 hours. I mean, one person, one voice. You have to let people talk, but still, there's a lot of commentary over like, I'm walking my dog, doing this, I'm in the traffic, the idea is like, you could at least someone there, the traffic engineering department, or somebody could come to that meeting and just be like, here's all the Google data to support anything in the conversation. Like right now, there's this much flow, there's this much queue. No one could quantify it. It was all like personal observation, and it was all different.
But now we have a lot of that, so we've got to start working.
Yeah, just kind of like it aggregates up to a certain level where the person walking the dog can listen to somebody like just summarize. Well, this is the flow. This is the flow quantified.
Last thing quickly.
So it sounds like a small thing, but if you're working with a city analyst or city department or a community group, make sure you document the heck out of everything you're doing so you can hand that over to whoever's the champion and then train them on whatever skills they need to do that. And it may take some time, but those 2 things are essential to keeping a project going beyond whenever you exit.
So that somebody else can pick it up. Yeah. Well, good. Thank you everyone for coming. The good news is we're actually working with data science to put together collaboratoriums on a lot of this kind of stuff. So stay tuned. Lots of good stuff coming. Thank you to our panelists.